So firstly, thanks for everyone for tuning in with us today, and obviously thanks to Marcus for being here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm one of the organisers of the London CTOs and run a tech recruitment company called RecWorks. So we've been on a mission at RecWorks for the last 12 years to find ways that recruitment can be a force for good in the tech industry beyond just getting people jobs. And so it's specifically been around learning, community building, mentoring, career development, and that kind of thing. So we do lots of stuff around bringing people together like this. So we've been organising the London CTOs for over 10 years now and running a bunch of different events and initiatives in the space. At the moment, we're running a few things around aspiring CTOs. So we've got a group for people that want to progress into the role, as well as an interim and fractional group. So if you're interested, then please do get in touch afterwards. It's all powered by revenue that we make from recruitment. So we get paid. The only money that we make is from getting people jobs or finding developers for clients. And then a percentage of that goes back into this kind of work. So if you're looking or you're interested to discuss that further, then please do get in touch. Anyway, on to today. So Marcus, for those of you that are new to Marcus, I know we've got some people here that know Marcus's work. For those of you that are CTO members that are new to Marcus, an unusual background from many of our speakers. So he's a former senior military officer and red teamer who's been sharing these techniques with corporations since retiring from the Royal Air Force in 2013. So in the RAF, he's served across the globe and joined tours with the Royal Marines, the Royal Navy, and the US Marine Corps. And he was deployed to Iraq in 2003. So his final tour saw him in an air command role, working closely with the Cabinet Office and coordinating the air security for the London 2012 Olympics, which was obviously a natural red teaming event. So after retiring as a wing commander, Marcus moved into business, initially working for a global consultancy, before moving on to lead major business transformations in the financial sector. So he's had a focus on enabling leadership to deal with the complexity of today's volatile and complex business environments. And he's now assisting organizations with decision support and provides red team training across the globe. So Marcus, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks for the intro, Barry, and good afternoon, everybody. So here we are today to talk about how do we make better decisions faster in the VUCA world. And we'll cover what VUCA means if you don't know what that acronym means yet. As Barry gave you an overview of my somewhat checkered past and background, multiple different areas, but bringing really what is a military mindset and capability into business over the last 7 years. And I see Ben Ford in the audience as well. And we've been working together closely throughout the last few months, trying to enable executives and organizations understand better how to use these individual skill sets that we have. And obviously I then finished off and are now working as the vice president and partner with Red Team Thinking. And we'll cover more of that later on. My partner in that is the founder himself of Red Team Thinking, a gentleman called Bryce Hoffman, quite a ballsy character who badgered the Pentagon several years ago to say, I'd like to come on your Red Team Leaders course at Fort Leavenworth. And you can see Bryce there in the middle of as the guy in the blue blazer receiving his award, having gone through the 3-month schoolhouse there. So following that, Bryce became quite enamored. He's a former journalist of 20 years. He went through Ford in the 2000s. With Alan Mulally as the CEO, and he wrote the book American Icon, which is a business bestseller, Wall Street Journal #1. And from that, he came onto this course because he felt it was something better that the businesses could do to really strive to continue achieving the excellence that they certainly had in Ford and not crash as they had done throughout the decades previously. So from that, he wrote the book Red Teaming, which he then evolved even further. And since launching the book 3 years ago, he's been rolling this out as a capability, taking the tools and techniques from both the army and what are literally centuries old, and I'll cover that more, techniques into business. And that's where the evolution is to where we are today with the concept of red team thinking, which I'll go through more of today's speech. But really trying to understand why today is the time for change. And I think we can all agree that undoubtedly we are in a time of change. That is indisputable. But change is always difficult. And I think predominantly for exactly the reasons here that Socrates talks about, people can't seem to let go of the past. They can't let go of all the old ways of working and their mindsets and embrace the new. And it takes time. But let's be honest, we don't have time anymore. And that's certainly transient from what we've seen in the last few months. And if you want to understand the scale of the challenge, this quote here It's moving too fast. It is revolution, not evolution. There are many accelerations at once, and one of the biggest problems is the difficulty of mankind to cope with it. I don't know whether political leaders or business leaders can easily handle it. And if you think about the way technology has shifted in the last 10, 20 years alone, the one thing that hasn't shifted is the human mind. It's still the same, the brain capability as it always was. That was from Ian Connor, who's the CEO of Centrica, so British Gas, a big, large UK gas utilities. And this was 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago now. So obviously lots happened since then. But very quickly in that time frame, when he took over as CEO, they were in a huge profit of 415 million. And less than a year later, Centrica had lost over 980 million pounds. And at that point, he then said he was standing down. He was due to stand down this summer, but very quickly disappeared in early 2020 after COVID kicked in. So we can now start to see and understand and appreciate the speed with which change is happening. And obviously 2020 arrived, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This is now a real thing. It's been around for years. It's been around since the 80s. Again, came from the US Army. It's become almost a buzzword for the last sort of 5 years in the boardroom, but it is now a real thing. People are standing up and appreciating that this is something that's happening. And it's unprecedented. This is now VUCA 10x, Mother VUCA, people are calling it. You know, it's VUCA cubed. It's off the scale of what we've ever seen before. And it's not just, you know, the large economy globally we've seen. This is affecting the marketplace, products, consumers, businesses of all walks of life and techniques. And obviously the new threats and new opportunities are emerging every day. People see a lot of these things as threats. We had a client we were working with earlier this year. We got brought in to help them because they were being too successful. They'd 4x'd between March and May and couldn't keep up with the demand and capability. So it's not just the threats that are out there, but it's the opportunities that if you can market and get on well, then again, you can take the benefits of what these situations can bring with you. And it's how do you get on the front foot compared to what your competitors are doing. And then again, everyone's talking about the new normal, or when are we going to get back to normal? We've got clients who thought we're going to get back to normal in September. America's thinking all's going to be well after the elections, and January, everything's going to be back to normal again. You know, this is now the new normal. And it's not just COVID that's going to be the crisis. There are going to be crisis after crisis following each other now. So that has to become something that we naturally deal with in our day-to-day routine business. Question is though, are we ready to deal with it? And alone since March, we've seen companies who have been ready. We've seen others who've taken the ostrich mode and stuck their head in the sands. We've seen others who took a knee-jerk reaction and have caused more damage to their business than good by not thinking about the solutions that they impacted their customers and client base with very quickly. So the Business Agility Report, great organization, and they produce a report every year about how business agility and its adoption in the marketplace of Agile and the transformational methodology we're seeing is going. And they put out the top themes for why people are facing these challenges along the way. Now, 2019, the top 3 were leadership style, as you can see here, change management, and the culture. 2018, the year before that, again, the top one was leadership. Right, so we're starting to see a trend here. Now, when I briefed this earlier this year, before the next report came out, I said, who wants to take a bet on what the number 1 will be next year? And the report's just come out. Anybody want to take a bet on what the number 1 failure is again this year? Yes, it's leadership style again. So what we're seeing now is it's not the agile tools, processes, techniques that are causing it not to work so well, and we'll cover that more shortly. It's the leadership mindset and the ways of working at that level that are still causing it to not be impactful as it should be. So what is a leadership challenge? Who wants change? Everybody wants change when you speak to people. But then when they realize it applies to them, they're not so keen anymore. And this is where you start to get the naysayers and, oh, we're not too sure we want to change that. Going back to what Socrates said, I'm quite happy with the way things are. The old world works well for me, when it suddenly doesn't. But then even harder, who physically wants to lead that change? And this is where CTOs, CIOs, CEOs, CFOs, the C-suite executives are now having this thrust upon them, and they have to lead this. So you're bringing in a very new, agile, 21st century way of working, but expecting a 20th century management mindset to deliver that capability, which is why it's appearing so difficult. And why is that? Again, we talk about the agile mindset. Well, we've got a leadership mindset that we need to address first. There's an institutionalized command and control culture. All right. Now there is an exclusive desire to change. When we speak to C-suite executives, they really want to change, but it's a default. It's a muscle memory process of theirs that they've got to where they get today through certain behaviors that really are no longer applicable in today's modern era of business. But how do you make those old habits hard and change to break? How do you teach an old dog new tricks? And I had some good conversation recently with Mark Cox, the author of The Business Case of 11. We were talking about SPOMs, the stale, pale, old male. And if you look at Marks and Spencers and these large conglomerate organizations who are very rapidly going downhill, there's a certain age, there's a certain gender of individuals who are running these companies. And being a pale old male is not a bad thing. I'm one, and many people are. But if you're stale, then you're going to bring that business down quickly in this day and age, because you cannot afford to be stale and not keeping on the front foot with what's approaching and what has hit us this year, and has certainly been coming in the digital era of the last 5 to 10 years. And again, some comments from individuals through that survey. Directors of the company subscribe to outdated mentalities, archaic mindsets, all familiar things that if you ask people describe their C-suite, these are things that will come up with. Transformations are being driven from the bottom up, not led from top down. Self-serving, bureaucracy, all the good buzzwords that we could all, talk about over a beer, but they still exist, believe it or not, in this day and age. And again, the data doesn't lie. It's all there. I've highlighted and read the key things so we don't waste too much time reading them, but we're still applying 20th century bureaucracy and red tape. These are providing major challenges, and everything's happening now in terms of years. The agile pipe dream of these things happening months, weeks at best, are becoming year-long programs. So agility, product management, short-term delivery is just becoming another name for a monster long-term program. Why? We've got risk-averse cultures. When we should be taking risk and understanding and mitigating and managing risk, we're becoming very risk-averse. We're operating more in silos with Agile rather than cross-dependency. There's more layers being created because of that. Workforce, there's something called the mediocrity, the sheep-like passivity of people just becoming so beaten down that they're just becoming zombie-like. And there's a great thing called zombie scrum out there. If you look at how that's created this sort of workforce of mindless individuals, not because they want to be, but it's just because there's no point fighting anymore. And there's really a lack of strongly supportive leadership at the top. And I've seen this in many areas, and I've worked in the large organizations, and it's why we're going into organizations now to help them at that top level first to understand and how they adapt. Because they're all sold these new ways of working. 5 to 10 years ago, it was 20 years ago, the anniversary of Agile, but the 5 to 10 year period, we've really seen all these things come out of the woodwork. The consultancies are selling these like snake oil and promising wonder and awesomeness. But already we've started to see them failing rapidly. I mean, percentages here, but it's gone from 70 to 85% if you look at all the surveys. So really just over 10% of things are being successful. And when you look at the companies that are being successful, they are natural red teamers. They are naturally thinking in the 21st mindset. They are thinking how to be adaptive and disruptive. They're not laggards of the last century. And the problem is these new ways of working, they don't work on their own. And we'll talk about that why. They've moved us from the 20th century sort of tayloristic, mechanistic product line ways of working into the 21st century knowledge management using the human brain, but we're not capitalizing on the human. We've got all these great different tools and techniques out there that are selling and making people a fortune, but they're almost complicating the marketplace beyond utility. Everybody started to use them at the coalface, and where they perceived that success, they then thought, great, let's now scale this across our whole enterprise. So what works well in a scrum team of 9 isn't going to work so well across 250,000 people across the globe. And that's where the problem's been, is trying to take that sort of one-stop shop fix-it problem and overlay that at a much grander scale. And obviously then we see failure at a very, very high percentage rate. There was a cost of over $1 trillion being spent by US banks in the last 5 years on large-scale digital transformations, and not one could prove a single benefit of any value whatsoever. So there's a lot of money being invested in this and not a lot of real value being shown. Again, I mentioned earlier the main reasons why it's command and control, more often referred to as command and comply. And again, it's a quote from the coalface, because we've got these old school behaviors. There's a fear by executives, whereas opposed to releasing the reins of autonomy that Agile demands, they get fearful and therefore they pull the reins tighter and therefore counter the productivity and the capability that allowing teams to be autonomous actually brings. And that's down to often a lack of trust. They don't believe their workforce can do what they need to do. They know best, so they're keeping those reins tight. And it's an inability to delegate control to the next level. And one of the things we talked about in the military is mission command and commander's intent, where you are not having the general hamstrung by making all the decisions. They have the ability to control the workforce by passing down that ability to make decisions at the coalface. They give executive command to the lowest rank possible, who has got the best information and situational awareness to make the decisions that need to be made, rather than going back up and down. And this is why these things take years to do rather than months and weeks, because everybody's hamstrung at the coalface. There's also a massive obsession with speed. Every metric of organizations I've been in with, they're looking at efficiency, velocity, speed, output, without considering the impact that has on everything else from a holistic perspective. Your speed may be great, but the risk you're causing and your quality is going down. And as it says here, fast is fine, but you have to be accurate. And the great quote from Daniel Kahneman recently in the podcast is, you have to slow down. And one of my mantras is slow down to speed up. And if you take that time out now to go slower, then you will ultimately much quicker downrange, because you won't have the mistakes that you're going to get tripped up by because you've failed to really take an understanding. But there is a new hope, right? You must unlearn what you've learned. And another hugely famous individual here. Can anybody guess who this might be? Yoda, educating Master Luke of how he must become a Jedi, right? His mind was too full of stuff. So he had to unlearn a lot of the things he'd been taught to relearn. And there's a great book by Barry O'Reilly called Unlearn. I apologize for the American spelling. Barry's an Irishman living in San Francisco. But Barry talks about how you have to unlearn all these behaviors that got you to where you are. Because again, why do those executives behave like they do? Because when the pressure's on, you divert back to type. So if you're a risk-averse individual who can't let go of the reins, when you get under pressure, you'll revert to that type. Whereas if you start to unlearn those behaviors, and you do that by not shifting your mindset, you can't shift the mindset. It takes ages. You change behaviors first. Change the behaviors by small, intricated pieces of work. That will change your perspective, and then over time that will impact your mindset, which will therefore affect your behaviors. So it's this non-vicious circle, if you will, of virtuous behaviors, but it starts with behavior. Don't try and change a culture or a mindset. I see again so many organizations where I've got the culture change officer. It just doesn't work like that. You have to change behaviors and how the business and the organization does stuff before you start to shift the behaviors. So do we need new ways of leading? Again, we talked about how hard it is to do this. Something certainly needs to change, because numerous businesses are failing at a drastic rate, and especially this year, and more to come, sadly, in the unemployment and the impact on the economy that has. I briefed this in a presentation workshop we were doing last night, and this list here went to about 30 by the people commenting. So, we'll create this into a much broader topic for discussion later, but the list is endless on why businesses fail. But there's a core understanding here, and it's that ineffective leadership, lack of purpose, and the inability to make good decisions quickly. That's the whole point of why we prefer the red teaming philosophy is you've got to make decisions. They have to be good and they have to be quick. You get executives, yeah, but I make decisions. Yeah, dude, but they're really bad. You make them in a knee-jerk reaction fashion and they cause all of the dominoes to fall over really quickly. Or you do make a good decision, but it took you 4 years to do that. And the world around us has spun so quickly, it's now obsolete and out of date. So how do we make a good decision fast in the context of the situation you're facing? And again, VUCA has now gone 10x given the COVID threat we've been facing this year. And more of these similar things will come as we follow into 2021. So why do transformations fail? Generic end-to-end cycle of delivering value here, old school ways of why, what, how, the big vision, the strategy, and the execution. What seems to have happened is the new ways of working have sort of said, oh, we don't have to do all that old school stuff anymore. We just go straight into execution. We test and learn. And I said to Ben the other day, that's great if it's two blokes in a garage building a startup. But when you're doing multi-billion-dollar programs, failing fast isn't an option. You fail fast, you just pour millions down the drain. So all this, hey, let's fail fast, let's be cool and agile, doesn't work when you're talking business. And because they've forgotten everything up front from the why and which is the leadership element, what we start to see is that's dismissed. The leadership isn't taking accountability of what it should be doing, and therefore you get a 20% success. What's even worse, when it goes wrong, the hawks and the audit go straight into the execution. and they start giving the teams hell about why are you failing. It must be something to do with Agile. Agile gets a bad name. It's being slaughtered on LinkedIn right now, but it's not the tool and it's not the workman. It's the understanding and clarity of intent and purpose and capability to have effective control at the coalface, which is all back in the why and the what. So if you don't do that right, the front end will undoubtedly fail. And when we talk 20% success, when we see 70, 75, 80% failure, it all kind of makes sense. So again, planning got thrown out. The baby went out with the bathwater as Agile came in. As Blackadder would say, planning is not a dirty word. And Benjamin Franklin here, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. All right. And also Eisenhower, plans mean nothing. Planning is everything. You have to have understanding of the planning you go through and involve those who are going to execute the plan in the planning phase. Because if they don't understand why you're doing something and they're asked to do it, then again, they're not going to have that ability to make the decisions that need to pivot when they get to that stage. And before you have a plan, you need to have a strategy that is delivered via that plan. And again, the underlying principle of strategy are enduring. Your strategy should not change. Whatever happens, your strategy should be in place. And what changes is the how, is the execution. What you're intending to do, your strategic plan to achieve that shouldn't be changing. But the execution, the tools, techniques are more than capable of doing so. So we now need to think differently rather than do things differently. If we apply a different way of thinking up front into our vision and understanding, when you speak to a board, 7 executives, tell me your vision of the company. 6 won't be able to tell you. Or you'll get, it's what was that, Jeff? I thought that's what you said, times 7 or 8. And then tell me about the strategy. And it's normally written on the back of a fag packet and it's one sentence. It's normally the strap line, the bingo word of the company. There's no real clarity of the vision, the intent. So if you don't have that understood at the executive, how can you expect that to happen at the coalface? But if you apply thinking at all these different stages as you go through, and again, this is drawn linearly, but it's not in a linear fashion. This is an iterative fashion that continually feeds back in loops and understanding of what's going on up and down this command chain, then you're likely to have a much more increased and improved chance of success at the coalface. And what's more important, and this is a great thing we learn in the military, strategy to task, you have the continuation of the red thread of understanding from the top to the bottom. So whoever's executing at the coalface understands the thing they are doing today ties into the plans for that quarter, the strategic understanding for the year, and the vision of the company. And that's why you have to have clarity, control, and competence to do these things. So if you have clarity of all of that and your competence to do your work, then you can start to take more control from the top of the pyramid. But if you don't have that clarity, which many don't, and I'd say a high 90% don't understand at the coalface why they're even doing what they're doing, they're just blindly following it and going back to that sheep-like zombie behavior, then you're seeing a very, very different outcome at that stage. So we clearly need a new way of thinking or a different way of thinking because we're using 21st century ways of working, but we're still in the 20th century mindset of management and thinking how we go forward. That was Bryce back in his school days, but he denies it. So what is red team thinking? This isn't something we've made up to join the consultancies and just sell people snake oil with the latest new fad bingo word. Red team has been around for centuries. It started off with the chap on the left here. That's Pope Sixtus V. He's got a bigger nose than I have, so I like him. He opened up the Devil's Advocate, or the Officia di Diabolo, in the Vatican. Back in 1482, they were getting overwhelmed with people coming to be canoned, to be saints. And he had just this queue of them outside the door, and every time someone was received a sainthood, they were paid, and it was costing the Vatican a fortune. So he said, hang on a minute, I'm not sure these people are as virtuous as they make out. So he opened up the office of the Devil's Advocate, and people had to apply and fill out forms and bring their goodliness to the forefront. And just in the first year alone, there's 75% reduction in applications. And this is still in office today. It was reduced by Pope John Paul II, but Mother Teresa also went through this process when she applied to be a saint. Leaping forward, late 18th century, the Kriegspiel, the wargaming. So this is the Prussians are fighting Napoleon. And at the time, this is where red teaming first came about. They were getting beaten on a daily basis. So they brought all their generals together and understood that, Napoleon has a phenomenal capability on the battlefield. But if we bring all our individuals who are experts in their own areas, so the chief artillery guy, the chief horse cavalry, the chief weaponeer, and put them around the table, and we mapped this out using little wooden dolls, and they painted the little wooden dolls red for Napoleon, as their uniform was at the time. And the Prussians had Prussian blue, which was their uniform. So they had red and blue little pieces of wargaming on the table. And that's where the first naming of red teaming came from. So how do we red team what our enemy's going to do to us in a wargaming scenario? Then during the Yom Kippur War, obviously the understanding that Egypt was going to attack was almost blatantly ignored. And if you watch a great movie called The Angel on Netflix at the moment, that shows a story of this. Now it's a real Peter and the Wolf scenario where they were attempting to feign an attack and then stopped. And eventually Israel just, I'll just stop. They're not doing anything. Ignore them. And then they attacked. And there was a mass slaughter. And all the indications and warnings were there, but they ignored it. So they set up a team called Itzimid Sabra. And their motto is similar to the SAS of who dares wins, who thinks wins. And they now have a capability for all of their Mossad and military where they have the Itzimid Sabra capability in the room with them. And they are the people who will challenge and come up with what the opposite might be should they have any plans or strategies. Bringing it to the more recent 21st century, obviously 9/11. I was out in the States at the time with the Marines when that happened, and obviously subsequently deployed to Iraq. But that was a major failing of collaboration between all of the different intelligence services, police, aviation. And the day after that happened, the CIA stood up the Red Cell to then start looking and understanding how these things happened. And obviously that was then taken forward into the war on terror, and the red team capability was deployed into Iraq and Afghanistan. And we've seen the schoolhouse that Bryce went through at Leavenworth stood up since then. And then what's different about the red teaming thinking here, and this is the best example that we've found of what red teaming actually is. So why do we have red team? Now, these are established by an enterprise to challenge the aspects of its very own plans. And that's the point here, is it is deliberate challenge. And this is why we're seeing so many problems in industry today. When I talk to people, there's a lack of psychological safety. So people don't put their hand up and call something out. They don't have an opinion. They've lost their voices. And again, the second thing Daniel Kahneman said, have to slow down, is protect your dissenters. And if you can have a dissension across your capability, that's going to stand you in a much better place, because your staff who are passionate, who see what's going on at the coalface, are going to be able to provide you with the understanding and the ideas that are going to take you into that next level of capability before you fail. So it's this aspect of deliberate challenge that if you can enable that in your organization, and that's why it has to come top down, then the return on investment you're going to get is tenfold. You don't need to pay consultancies to answer the questions you've got. Ask your people in your workforce. They already know the answers. They just haven't been given the opportunity to speak. And when they have, they've often been slapped down or had their bonus rescinded. So it's how do you enable people? And this is where the red teaming concept allows that to happen. So what is red team thinking? It's a mindset. And I've said before, you can't just shift the mindset. I can't say, right, everyone go out tomorrow and be a red teamer or think in a red teaming way. You have to have a methodology, a capability, a way and a process of doing that and allowing that. Because again, it's just like executive I spoke to, I said, hey, how are your workforce for giving you feedback and information? It goes great. He said, I've empowered them all and I've told them they all have psychological safety. Wow. And how did you do that? I told them at my monthly update. And I even did a video on Yammer or whatever they were using. Great. That's funny, because when I speak to your staff, 95% of them told me there's zero psychological safety and they don't speak. So again, you have to do something physically and enable them with a toolkit or a capability rather than just tell people, because they know, again, it's coming out of the words of an executive, therefore it's highly unlikely to be believed, which is a sad state of affairs. This isn't a replacement either. When I'm not saying Agile's garbage, Scrum's rubbish, get rid of it. I think they're amazing tools that have been misapplied. They've been misapplied because people aren't thinking. So red team thinking for me is it's a bolt-on capability that allows the mind and the ways of working that come with this capability to use these tools and techniques better and more effectively. It's not a replacement for what's out there today. It's an augmentation capability. And it is a new way of thinking. We are stuck in old ways of thinking. The pale old males are often stale and are thinking in the wrong way from the last century. And we have to evolve, and we have to evolve rapidly given what we're facing today. I could put 150 people up on this screen, different businesses. I get the Sunday Times business section every Sunday. Read through there, there'll be another 4 or 5 that have failed. Debenhams, Marks and Spencer's is going to fail. And then you see Gymshark, and you see all these other organizations that are thrusting in the opposite direction. So people are jumping on the opportunity while others are dying because of the threats. And it's not because of COVID. So many you see, oh, my business is going under because of COVID. No, you failed. You failed to prepare. You failed to think. And most organizations die, as we say here, from self-inflicted wounds. It's crystal clear when you go and investigate. The writing was on the wall for many years in many of these organizations. We can all predict when they go under when you have a quick look at what's happened, the purchases they've made, or the investments over the last 5 to 10 years, because they think it's not going to happen to them. And especially in the banking world, they are very fat and comfortable, and they're now starting to panic because their reserves are going to get dwindled when people default. As we have economic crises and people aren't in work, who takes the hit? The banks. And there'll be no bailouts this time if banks start to go under. What we saw in 2008 was a one-off. Nowadays, the challenger banks will come in and hoover up if the big banks go down. So it's something we have to be very cognizant of as we go forward and look at history. None of this is new. This has all happened over decades. COVID is just an accelerant, not a cause. And why is that? And this is why we need to change our way of thinking. Adam Smith, the great philosopher, he convinced everyone that the way we assumed and we made our decisions was we were rational human beings, right? Which we'd all say we are, would we not? I'm a rational human being. I'm sure everybody here today is. And unless we're swayed by something hugely, strongly emotional, or we don't have the information, then we can make a rational decision, right? That's absolute nonsense. Again, Kahneman here, if you read Thinking Fast and Slow, our brain is a machine for jumping to conclusions, and it absolutely is. And why is that? Because we are impacted and affected. If you have a brain, you are affected by these biases, right? And there's a huge longer list than this, and each one of these is very, very deep. But it just shows you how these things impact how you think, how you behave. And it's not to say that they're bad. Optimism bias, he calls that the engine of capitalism. If we weren't overly optimistic, 95% of startups fail. If you knew that and believed that as an entrepreneur, you wouldn't start up. But everybody does, and therefore we get great ideas. We get great restaurants selling amazing food and great digital technology and innovation. But it's not that these are bad. It's something that you have to be aware of them because they will impact how you make decisions. And we see a lot of this with the way we've done it. We've always done it that way, or the bandwagon effect. Let's all jump and try safe because our opposition are using it. Yeah, understanding all of these, and this is something we cover in detail during our training, is how you can then approach the individuals behaving and thinking that way and how they've been impacted by all of these biases. The major ones that we see in organizations, groupthink, the sheep-like zombie behavior we spoke about, everybody's thinking alike. Satisficing, that's going with the first decision and the quickest one we come up with. We see so much solutionizing in business. When you start doing those large value transformation programs, there's a solution already understood, but they've actually failed to understand the problem they're trying to solve. The Abilene paradox is everybody jumps on the bandwagon with whatever's suggested because somebody said it and nobody says no or disagrees. Internal politics, we often see many, many issues caused by that. People trying to get promoted, people trying to move departments, people trying to suck up to a certain executive or feather their own nest in department. And obviously that ties in with careerism. All of these things are in existence in every organization I've been in. They were in existence in the military, in the cabinet office, all at different levels, but you have to identify them and understand them because these are the most impactful things that will ultimately derail your organization if you don't address them. So how does red team thinking help? It allows you to have the tools, which then have changed the behaviors to then counter those unconscious biases that we're aware of that sit there in our unconscious, subconscious and impact what we do and think. It gives you techniques to surface alternative perspectives. If we've all got groupthink and think in a certain way, again, think about the Israelis. It's Sabra. Who's thinking differently? Who's in that room challenging everything you do? Who's playing the devil's advocate? Who's saying, we could do that, but what about this? What if our competitors did this? Or what if our customers want that? And it forces you to challenge your own assumptions. When we look at plans, all plans are made on assumptions. They have to be. But an assumption is something that you believe to be true and will come true without further proof. And what we find mostly is that assumptions are flights of fancy. They are wishful thinking. And therefore, when the plan starts to be executed, they start to fail rapidly. And when, again, you forget execution and go back to look at the plan, you see that many of the assumptions the plan were based on were never going to become a reality. and therefore you were failing before you'd even set off. Here's a real key one here, is leveraging the wisdom of the group. Great question we have to most C-suite is, why are you paying your consultants more than your executives? And then the cool look at the CFO and go, Jeff, are we? What are we paying these guys? And then we'll educate them. Because the wisdom isn't in the consultant coming in with all the answers, because they get their answers by going out on the shop floor and asking the group of people who work for you. So if you can use the tools and techniques that we can provide with Red Team Thinking, you're going to get so much more quality and depth of understanding and information from the people who are best placed to provide it, but feel hand-shacked and unable to do so because of all the other issues we spoke about. And also, we're going to see some diverse options and ensuring that the best idea wins. Again, by using anonymous tools, you can have the CEO in the room and you can have the newest intern who's making coffee over summer. Everybody has a voice, everybody's ideas get surfaced, everybody's ideas get voted on, and the intern can quite easily beat the CEO. And everyone accepts that, and that's fine, but you don't ever have that with the alpha male or the hippo in the room in today's modern era in the offices. That's one benefit of using online capability and tooling. We can use those techniques if we have them available and we're allowed to use them, but it really does allow you to get complete diverse options and thought and allow that best idea to win. And why would you not want that? So what do we believe as an organization? And there's Bryce back in March when we were in London for the final week before lockdown. So we believe it's the lies we tell ourselves, right? We're quite forthright on this. Both individually and organizations, we are lying to ourselves. And one of the first tools that we do with our clients is, again, anonymous. What are the lies you tell yourselves as an organization? And it's quite fascinating to see, customer first, like hell we are. The CEO puts us all first. No, he doesn't, right? All of these things come out. And when the CEO reads that, that's either a wake-up call or a confirmation of what he already knows. But these things continually hold you back. Because by doing that, you're lost in a facade, a fog, right? And you'd rather hide behind those lies because they feel nice and warm, rather than confront those horrible hard truths that are outside the window. There's wolves and sharks and bears around your building, but we don't want to know. We'll shut the windows, close the curtains. But you can't do that anymore. And this year, if anything, has proven that adaptability needs to be now. And you need to look out that window and address what's outside and use your people to do that. And this is one of the benefits of COVID. It's this unprecedented disruption that's coming. It's not unprecedented, it's happened before, but it's disrupting us more now because of the technology available. And now this is bringing an existential threat to every organization. If COVID went away tomorrow, completely gone, there would still be major problems for the next decade because the impact it's had hasn't been addressed. Do we go back to work? Do we stay at home? People don't want to go back to work. People don't want to go back to what was normal before. And that hasn't really been addressed or attacked and understood properly yet. And ultimately, the traditional planning tools that we've seen from the last decade and even the recent ones can't cope with this. We are seeing Agile, Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, all of these methodologies, which are fantastic, failing. And it's because they're not being used with the right mindset by the individuals who need to understand them the best, i.e. the executive at the top. So what do? We help you confront those hard truths, right? It's uncomfortable, it can be painful, but it's revelationary, and it's also fun, and it's discreet, and it's something that is the first step to getting back to where you need to be from an organizational perspective. And not only do that, we allow your culture to shift to become a truth-telling culture by enabling everybody in the company to use the tools and techniques, start giving you the feedback and the information you need to ensure those truths remain truth. We arm individuals. Okay, you're going to have your own red team capability across your organization at whatever level you need with the tools and techniques that they need to navigate this brave new world. Some dramatic words here, but we are facing a brave new world. And if you're not armed accordingly, then you're going to fail. Your company will die. And again, the economic impact that we're going to see because of that is going to be potentially catastrophic for the globe. Ultimately, we make people learn how to make good decisions faster, as we talked about. That's the ultimate end state of using these tools and techniques. So how do we do it? 4 elements. We have training. So we do open enrollment training where we have a boot camp, which is online, self-serve. Just gives you the overview of the basic training, 4 or 5 hours worth. And then we have 7 masterclasses where people can come and go through and learn the key tools that you can take away and then use within your organization. We also do training for organizations using either their own strategy, or we can bring in a made up one that allows them to focus on understanding the tools first. Then we do facilitation. So this is what we call red team rapid deployment. So we'll go into organizations 2 to 3 days max and help them understand and red team their plans, strategies, and the problems they're facing. Lead them through it, educate a team who's there with us, and that they can learn and understand the tools to take forward and do themselves. By doing that, we've also now grown into doing coaching. So an executive who attends one of training or facilitation courses go, could you do this for me? Because as we all know, executive coaching, a bit like Agile, is becoming Marmite, and depending who you have as your coach, it's either dismissed by executives as completely useless and a waste of an hour a week, or it's the best thing since sliced bread. So taking them through a red teaming program at the executive level, 1 hour a week for 12 weeks, starts to shift their behaviors, which shifts their mindset. And again, if you can start at the top, that's how you get the cascade down to get the best way of working for the rest of the organization. And then presentations, guest speaking, like today, keynotes. Bryce is a phenomenal speaker who charges for doing this sort of stuff, unlike me, where again, just getting people understanding and excited about this stuff is an easy way to start rolling it out across your business. Here's the toolkit that we have at present, with a load more in construction, but these are just all very simple tools that you can learn in 3 to 6 hours and then apply them. And what's nice about them, and Ben can attest to this, they're really easy to learn, really simple to apply, and hugely effective. And I went into a very large bank in Canary Wharf for the 2-day strategic planning session with them. And I started off with the 6 strategic questions. And the day before, they gave me a telephone directory size document of 8 of the executives in the rooms, all of their objectives and key results for the year, their plan. So I walked in and said, thank you, that's lovely. That was great reading last night when I was sat in bed. I appreciate that. However, if you still want to apply what your plan is in this document, at the end of the 2-day session, I'll take you all out for dinner in Canary Wharf, plus drinks. They're like, okay. And I said, right, today we're going to start off with 6 strategic questions. And we're going to apply think, write, and share. So I'll ask you a question. You think about the answer, you write it down, and then you share it. So we don't get the hippo. We don't get people following what Bob said. So they all wrote down. And the first question was, what is the problem that this to-me document of yours is trying to solve? And they all took 2 minutes and wrote their answers down. And then I went around each executive, 8 of them, and I got 8 completely different answers. And I said, I knew that because I saw 8 stovepipes when I read your document. It's not aligned. It hasn't been joined up. You've not collaborated. If you'd sent that document out to 250,000 people across the globe next week, what would happen? You would create utter chaos and mayhem, but you wouldn't have realized it until it was downrange into execution. And to find where the problem actually came back from would probably almost be impossible without these tools and techniques. So using these are really effective, really simple, really quick. As I said, we did a 5 billion strategy last December with a major Fortune 15 company in New York. 5 days it went through this. And again, the value of rolling out a £5 billion program to slow down and take 5 days to make sure you've thought about what your competition is going to do. You've thought about all the assumptions that half of them are fake. Getting those things right means you are going to be increasing your chance of success and not pouring money down the drain. So red teaming the coronavirus, how do we physically do that? Again, a little quick 5-minute wrap up now to show you how we've done this year. So ultimately, we have to be resilient. And right now, it's not just resiliency of the organization, but emotional resiliency. Working from home has a massive impact on individuals, understanding the impact on your workforce, your own personal resilience as a leader. When you get these C-suite individuals away from the group of their compadres on their own, they're normal human beings, and they'll break down as quick as the next man or lady will, right? But you put them back in the room, the bravado comes on and the hubris, right? Don't be like that. Accept that there's some emotional, offload that's required here, because mental health issues we're facing and seeing many of those problems coming to the forefront now. Cognitive resiliency. Are you able to think? And we're all talking about diversity. It's a buzzword, EI&D. The best type of diversity is diversity of thought. And if you don't have diversity of thought in your organization and cognitive resilience, then again, you will ultimately fail. And then likewise, your strategy has to be resilient. If your strategy has to change every week, it's not a strategy. That's a cuffed plan that you're rolling with with the punches. You're reacting rather than responding with a clear understanding of where your organization's going. So a few things you can do. As we talked about, leverage your collective wisdom. Go back to your teams today and say, hey, what should we be doing that we're not? And believe me, you'll get lots of great answers that you'd never thought of. What are we doing that we should stop? That list will be even longer. Goes back to the enemy within. How much of the crippling behavior is being done by your own organization to yourself? And also, what's going really well that we should double down our effort on? So stop doing X and do Y twice. And again, ask your people that question, or these set of questions, and you will get so much quality feedback. And it will probably be right, which you can validate using other tools. But again, you're now starting to engage by changing behaviors. You've brought in some new techniques, and over time, that behavior will start to shift their perspective of you and then the mindset. Examine your assumptions. We all know we never assume, as that makes an ass of you and me, as my grandma taught me many years ago, and we've seen throughout many, many business briefings. How confident are we that each of these assumptions will prove true? And if you get a huge feedback saying no, low, rarely, never, then again, you may wish to look at your assumptions differently. And which of these pose the biggest risk to organizations? Now, assumptions are often like risks. We stick it on a Jira board, or we write it down somewhere, and then someone else is going to take care of it on our behalf. And we assume that the magic risk fairy is taking care of it until it then becomes a problem. Same with an assumption. We write it down, it therefore must be true because I've written it in ink, and then it becomes not true downrange and the problems start to happen. Your teams already know that, and they're aware of that, and they are cognizant of it, but they just don't say so. Contemplate failure. Rather than being overly hubristic and thinking how successful we're going to be, how could this completely fail and go wrong? The pre-mortem. We work with Dr. Gary Klein, who's the creator of the pre-mortem method. We taught that twice with him this year, and we're teaching again within January. But this is really looking at what could possibly go wrong. And it's not understanding the failure, the end state of failing. It's understanding the roadmap to get to failure. What are the signposts along the way that are going to trigger a reaction that you shouldn't ignore when it happens? You need to do something. So understanding what's the worst that could happen. What are the things that could lead you to that failed state? And then what can you do right now to stop or put plans in place that when they flag, so when your team's in execution and that first signpost of flag A arrives, they don't sit and wait. They don't call you for information. They don't say, this has happened, boss, what do we do? They're aware of that likely happening, and therefore they can pivot or react accordingly because it's been in the planning, and they're understood and able and allowed, empowered and enabled to do that without reverting all the way back up. Because invariably they don't, they go into ostrich mode, they don't raise it, and then the wheels come off and things fail. And then play the devil's advocate. We've advances to do devil's troika, which is a 3-way of being a devil's advocate. But really this is just following that ipsum ib sabra, being the opposition in the room, challenging your own plan. What other levers could you pull to accomplish the same thing? What other levers are your competitors going to be pulling today? I did a post today on LinkedIn. The enemy has a vote too. So while you're sat in your big shiny office doing this, believe it or not, down the road, your competitor is doing exactly the same thing, working out how to put you out of business. So come up with 2 alternative courses of action. Is one right? Is one wrong? Is one better? Can you flex between the two depending on what you approach as you go down that road? Then take a hard look at all 3 options and determine which one is best. Option A, option B, option C. In the military, Ben will know this, we used to do COA, courses of action. So you'd spend all day planning, then you'd do COA 1, 2, 3. And you'd have COA 1 would be absolute nonsense. COA 2 would be the one you wanted to get briefed, and COA 3 would be another nonsense one, forcing the general to pick COA 2. And invariably the smart guy would say, look guys, this is not what I want, right? I can see what you're trying to do here, but surely there are other options. And he'd just throw 2 or 3 things out that would completely sideball you because he's thinking. And invariably what would happen if he did that well, he'd then pick a piece of COA A and a piece of COA B and a piece of COA C to create his own COA D. But also remembering that parts of COA A, B, C that he didn't use were still there to revert to should he need to do going forward. And that allows you to therefore be perceptive of what's going to happen, but in a much better position to react when things do go wrong. So they're just 4 simple techniques. Again, on the website, you can download the full PDF from that for free, and it gives you sort of an 8-page overview how to do that. So again, going full circle back to Socrates. we've got to stop fighting the old. And if we've got people who are behaving in that way, we have to help them, educate them, or get rid of them. Let's be blunt. One of the CIOs I worked for at Lloyd's, he stood up when we started this transformation, says, let's be clear, the transformation bus is leaving. You're either on it, you're choosing not to get on it and will help you go elsewhere, or you're going to go under it. If anybody stops this or tries to be a laggard or blocker, I will make sure you are completely railroaded by this, because we have to do this. And if you don't get that, you need to change your mind overnight quickly and come to let me know tomorrow if you don't want to get on. But if you stand in the way, this will go over you. And now that's not even a call of the CEO anymore, CIO. This is happening without anybody driving that train. The train is rolling. So we have to be able to adapt. We have to build on the new capabilities that are there, understand where they're going wrong, and then adapt our mindset, our behaviors, and our perspectives to enable people collectively, not just the C-suite, to move forward and change accordingly and deal with what we're facing today and in the future. And that's a sad but true statement by Mr. Bertrand Russell. Thank you. Quick and dirty canter.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you very much for going through that. It's really actually shaken me up more than I was preparing for, I think. Does anyone out there have any questions on any part of Red Team Thinking for Marcus?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Chris.
How you doing? Yeah, obviously a lot to take in. I think I may have heard something similar a little while ago where somebody was saying, imagine what your competition might do to beat you and then go and do that. So I don't know whether that's similar, but it's obviously quite contrary, I suppose, to maybe what I've grown up with in startup land, which is don't worry about what the opposition is doing. You know what your customers need, just go and do that. You'll spend forever worrying what everybody else may or may not do. So how do you kind of marry those, or should I change my mindset?
No, it's contrarian thinking without a doubt. And it's not saying what are your competitors doing, go and do that. It's being aware of what they are doing and then making the best decision what that is to then do. It may be do that. It may be do something completely different. It may be ignore them, or it may be buy them. And we had this again, the company we're working with in Europe last year, they were spending so much effort on their competition, so much effort, like losing sleep, wasting hours. And then we went and did the stats and we came out and said, look, guys, you're making more money a week than they were. Why don't you just buy them? But then it came down to understanding the shareholders, the shareholder value. Our cash flow would have been reduced. Therefore, the shares would have gone down if we did that. And it just wasn't something that was, palatable at the time. And that's fine. But we raised the problem, understood one of the options to address it. And if that wasn't an option, then you take it off the table. But it really is all of these things, as we said at the beginning, how do you make good decisions or better decisions faster? And it doesn't mean that if they're doing X, you have to do Y. It's they're doing X. We have the option of doing A, B, C, D. And you have to apply the thought process to that. What you do is the right decision. Normally people, this is where the failures happen, is people knee-jerk react and go, if the competitor's doing this, we must do the same, or do something completely different. Rather than going through the techniques and the processes to understand if they are doing that, A, how does that impact us? Is it a problem? So often we do this and we go, what's the problem here? And they go, do you know what? There isn't a problem. We've created a solution, or we've built a technology capability. There's actually no problem there. We got so hooked on building a thing because everyone's got one, the latest shiny gadget, that actually the problem we're trying to solve doesn't exist. And we've just wasted, or we would have wasted, hours, months, money, time, effort, and resource. So the whole purpose of this isn't to tell you what to do. It allows you the options and understanding of what you could and should do, but which you could also quickly pivot away from should you have to do.
Thanks.
I jump in with another one.
Sure.
Marcus, you talked about diverse thinking, and I can totally see the value in that. I'm curious though, what does Red Team Thinking suggest? What can it offer when after you have diverse thinking, you also need to create alignment eventually? So you walked around, asked your people about what to do in the situation, and they all said something.
Yep.
And a few of them would have said opposite things. So in the end, there has to be a decision and followed by execution. So you also talked about the situation where people don't speak up. And one of the ways the situation could arise is when people initially do speak up, but their opinion is ignored. And so over time, they become discouraged.
Yep.
So back to the question, red team thinking, how does it balance the two?
Absolutely. And I learned this a lot in banking. We'd have all these mood surveys going out every month. And for the first couple of months, everyone would reply. We get 90% response. And then month 3, nothing. And the boss would go, what did you do wrong? What? Oh, hang on a minute. What did they tell us in month 1? Right. These were the top 3 things. Okay. And what have you done about them? Nothing. Month 2, they told us 3 things again. Nothing. And therefore people get fed up of, well, there's no point. And this is where you get back to the mediocrity of the sheep-like passivity, zombies. I have a great voice. I have phenomenal ideas, but every time I speak, even when you do ask me, you ignore it or don't do anything. So the validation of red team thinking is that you get the opportunity to have that say, but that say doesn't come from your voice and name. It just comes. And therefore the majority then can select if that is the right thing or that needs executing upon. So it's not that you speak and then someone goes, great, thanks, we'll dismiss that. You speak, it gets captured, and it is then voted upon, decided upon, that is one of 20 things that we're going to focus on. And we may pick 3. But what that does, it allows people to see that they have had a say, their say has been considered, and if it hasn't been considered, there's a reason why. And they're also in agreement with that because they're bought into the reason that, oh, wow, yeah, that idea that Bob came up with instead of me was way better than mine. But at least mine was on the table and people saw it being there and understood why I came up with that. And that can be completely anonymous. It can be revealed downrange, or depending on the level of safety, you can open totally with that. But it allows people to understand that, yes, I have a voice, but then beyond that, it's clear that it's been understood. And whether it's executed upon or not, and this is why I like red team thinking, we're not consultants. We don't give clients the answers. Because if I give you an answer, then I walk away and things start to go wrong. Oh, Marcus said we should do that. Let's ignore it. That's why it's failed. The beauty of red team thinking is it makes people think and they come up with their own ideas. So when we go back to how does that execute, we red team a plan or strategy, go through that plan numerous times. So when that plan's rolled out, those at the coalface have been engaged in the plan. They've seen the changes and they understand now why their thing is or isn't in there as well.
If I could just add a little bit to that one as well. So in practice, what red team thinking feels like is that you offload all the stuff that would often trip up on issues of ego and personality into the system, into the liberating structures that Marcus had on the slides. So, you know, rather than, you know, a person A arguing with person B about whose opinion was right, you offload it into a system so that you do dot voting that's completely clear, and then the outcome can't be kind of contrived, and it tends to make that whole kind of, you know, person B, if they're overruled, was heard, but they can see that what they've been overruled by is not, you know, somebody else's ego, but the whole group's cognition, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I've got a question. This is Steve.
Hi, Steve.
How do you prevent, frankly, you know, your own human nature taking over? You know, like one of the things that you say is that, like, so I do consulting work and I laugh when you say to do that. And one of the first questions we ask when we go to do consulting for security work is so what are the problems here? Because always the people inside are the ones who know the problems with the system. You know, we make the joke, it's the cord everybody sees on the floor that you've learned to step over, and you don't realize that it's a safety risk anymore. How do you prevent that? How do you prevent that mentality that, you know, essentially just getting used to all those things? How do you keep that from happening to yourselves through this, you know, red team thinking? Because it seems it would inevitably happen to every human.
It does. And as we talked about earlier, if you've got a brain and then you're affected by biases and exactly these sort of behaviors. So it's using the tools and techniques. And this is why having these tools and techniques that are so simple to apply, even if you're behaving and thinking in such a way, and Ben's seen this, you know, we were back in March doing this live in London with a group of 12 of us, and you see it in the room and people are talking, behaving, driving something a certain way, and then you'll stop and implement one of the tools and techniques and it will drag them completely back into a different way of thinking or understanding. And they'll even see, they'll grin and check themselves and go, ah, yeah, I saw where I was going with that. And thank you for correcting me and bringing me back on course. And all of this really is once it's been used effectively, as you get to those points, Stephen, which is a really good question of, you know, that trip hazard on the floor, you invariably, if you ignore that, you have to do that drastic pivot point. Whereas if you're implementing these tools and techniques in the right way across the whole organization, top down supported, then what that becomes is a small rudder shift. And it's just slowly left and right of arc, you know, 5 degrees here, 5 degrees there, meandering you around these obstacles as they approach you, rather than ignoring them. And therefore you react accordingly, have to do a hard 90-degree left turn to avoid it. Everything falls over, things break, people get upset, rightly so. So it's enabling people to see that's a problem. Most people step over that thing because A, complacency, but B, they don't want to speak up about it. They've raised their hand once, oh, just step over it, Bob, or oh, it's fine. And then everyone just becomes the sheep-like zombie again we spoke about. So I think that's the way we personally get over it, is reverting back to understanding we have these biases, understanding our brains work a certain way, and we're all different, and we all start to get to know each other and our own foibles as we're delivering and training. And therefore we know which tools and techniques to apply that will make sure we counter and not have that problem.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
I think there was one question I saw there from Silky, a quick question. How do you get the balance between group thinking and cumulative data-driven approach? Any thoughts on that, Marcus?
Yeah, great question. So again, you know, group thinking, we know, can be good, can be bad. You know, it's how do you gain and gather that information from the group you have? And if they are thinking in a sheep-like way, then again, that will be very apparent and understood. And again, by doing the sort of consultancy walk around and making sure you're getting the feedback from people, you'll see that. And then obviously understanding the data. The cumulative data-driven approach is understanding all the data that comes in and how you massage and manage that. And again, if you read American Icon, how did Alan Mulally get the data from Ford to be relevant? We see so many vanity metrics. I talked about speed earlier. You know, I've gone into organizations where I've just looked at their metrics and gone, so what? They are utterly meaningless. All they're doing is giving you fake comfort each year. So with your group thinking a certain way, you've almost created the metrics to support your group think. And therefore you're creating even more chance of failure, but thinking you're being successful. Goes back to that fog and that facade that all's well because my metrics tell me so. Well, it's like Vietnam, you know, if we want to count body bags, then we're going to go out and fill body bags. You know, you're creating metrics and they become very easily gamified by people without actually understanding that they're causing the problem. And therefore your group think is accentuated if your metrics aren't, you know, as they should be. And if you allow people to come up with their own, and this is why the objectives and key results is a great capability, but again, has quickly become like Marmite because people are able to game it and use it and abuse it for their own benefit and provide the green reporting that we see until it all goes red. And, you know, when Alan Mulally was doing this, he took over, there were 12.6 billion in debt, right? So he had his execs around the room and said, right, my business process review, it's a real simple RAG status, red, amber, green. Green's all's good, amber, you need help, red, we need to stop and do something different. Week 1, 12 guys came back, all green. He's like, did I explain what I meant last week? Yep, right, I'll explain it again. Week 2, all green. He's like, gentlemen, I'm not an idiot. I know you're not, but this is what these things mean. Week 3, came back green again. And he said, let me be clear, gentlemen. So you're telling me that all's well, all of your programs and projects are green, yet we are $12.6 billion in debt. Is anything at all red? And the next week, one guy came back and was red. And everyone paused waiting to watch him get fired. Mulally said, Jeff, stand up. Come and sit next to me. And he sat him down and he went through everything he'd reported and understood it. He said, right, what do you need me to do to help you? And that just sent a clear message to everybody in that room who were fearful and not willing to take the risk because the previous CEO would have cut their heads off. So it's understanding how this data and the metrics are built and created for the right thing and don't support groupthink rather than dismiss it.
That's
great
a good
question, Silky. Thank you.
About you know, Vietnam body bags there, Marcus. Really get it. Just one last thing. Do you recommend then having kind of a weighted data-driven approach at all? Because I did see something in your slides earlier. I know we're running out of time, so maybe offline if it requires.
No, absolutely. Hit me up. I'd love to talk more about metrics. I'm a big metrics fan and understanding it and how it's applied. But you've got to have data. But it's it's like everything. It's the right data. If it's an ugly truth you're hiding behind because it's data you've created, then you don't want to be really going down that alley.
Thank you. I'll ping you offline.
Yeah, please do. Great to catch up.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your questions. And obviously, Marcus, massive thank you for that today.
Thank you for all the engagement.
We'll put it on a YouTube and we'll send it out. Marcus, if there's anything you want to drop out to people, then do let us know with that.
Thank you.
And yeah, I was going to ask how people should follow up, but it's you've got it all there neatly on the screen. So
yeah, please add me. I'm prolific on LinkedIn, and I'd love to talk to people. We enjoy this stuff. We're passionate, and it's just great fun, and it works. So more than happy to talk to people and follow up.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone, then, and I'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Cheers,
Thank you.